Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Swedenborg and Life. Today we're going to be looking at how to be happy. Our topics include the pleasures of insanity and their removal, opening the skylight, and to keep moving. So I'd say that almost every product is marketed in some sense as a way to be happy. Happiness is a primary human goal and often the reason we do things and set goals. As Swedenborg put it, happiness is what the powerful seek in power and the rich seek in riches. But as you for happiness is, it can seem like there's more disagreement than agreement as to how to get there. So how do we get there? Well, as with any journey, it can be as much about knowing how to navigate the obstacles as it is about knowing where the destination is. Tonight, we'll take a look at some of the most prominent obstacles and offer some thoughts on how to get around them. Stay tuned. All right, we're here. We made it. Last week, it was almost a blizzard that stopped us. This week, it's icy roads, but we're here because we care about you and we care about the material. And I'm excited to talk about it. How to be happy is sort of something that I've been interested in since I'm a human person and we like being happy. My guest today is Richard Smoley. He's the author of The Deal. We're really happy to have him. Richard, thanks for coming on the program.
Great to be here.
All right, so we are going to dive right into our first topic now. All right, so the pleasures of insanity is a phrase that you'll hear in some Swedenborg translations, and he talks about that there are these certain things in us that if they go, we have a much better chance of receiving the kind of happiness and the things we need. So let's take a look at a quote from Secrets of Heaven. This is from number 5662. Heavenly peace enters in when the desires that spring from self-love and love of the world are removed. For those desires take peace away, molesting a person inwardly and causing him at length to consider rest to consist in unrest and peace in annoyances, because he considers delight to consist in evil desires. All the time a person is subject to these desires, he cannot by any means know what peace is. Indeed, during all that time he believes that such peace is of no worth. And should anyone say that one experiences this peace when the delights that spring from self-love and love of the world are removed, he laughs at the idea, for the reason that he considers peace to consist in the delight taken in evil, which is the opposite of peace. So I wanted to choose this quote especially in talking to you, Richard, because I know that in your book, The Deal, you had written a small segment on the pleasures of resentment, which to me resemble the pleasures of insanity that Swedenborg is talking about. So it actually seems like what you guys are saying is, in order to get happiness, there are some things that seem to be making us happy that we actually need to let go of. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's true. My book, The Deal, the subtitle is A Guide to Radical and Complete Forgiveness. So the book is essentially about forgiveness. And that means letting go of resentments and grudges and grievances. And you could say, well, why should I get rid of these grudges and grievances and resentments? And I could say in response, well, why should you take your garbage out?
Right.
If you think about it, these things are doing you absolutely no good. And they are not showing you an accurate view of the world. It's usually the case that people think that, the angrier they are, the more hostile they are, the more realistic a view they have of the world. But I don't think that's true at all. I think in that case, you find yourself over-suspicious, over-likely to see enemies anywhere, and very much, as Swedenborg says, not at peace. So if you manage to get rid of these resentments, grudges, and grievances, your road to peace is a lot clearer.
Yeah, and so it sounds like, okay, well, obviously, I'd want to get rid of that stuff, but sometimes people don't realize that's something they want to get rid of because, as you were saying, it seems like this is something I like. This is something that's serving me, because you can get so caught up in, it's not without its charm to think, oh, I'm going to be right or I'm going to punish this person because I'm right and they're wrong. So that kind of makes it not as obvious a choice, and it's not as easy to see how toxic these things are, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very true. People tend to become obsessed with their grievances, and another thing is that people become identified with them.
Right.
If you people start to think they are their grievances, and if you realize that you're not, if you realize that your grievances are something you want to get rid of, there is at least some space between you and these grievances because you no longer think you are those. And I'd say there's a big difference between going around feeling you have to be upset with the world, and maybe you're still upset with the world, but you realize that this is not a good thing to do. It's not hurting you. It's not helping you. And it's something you want to be rid of. And that changes your attitude significantly. If you keep a grudge or resentment against somebody else, it is not punishing that other person. That other person may well be completely unaware that you're mad at him. And if so, he's maybe unaware why.
Well, he should know. I mean, he knows what he did.
Right, exactly. But there is a saying that says, being resentful and expecting it to harm another person is like drinking poison and expecting it to kill somebody else. Mm-hmm. It's just you're really the one who's poisoning yourself with resentments and grievances. And the minute you realize that, you realize, hey, I want to be free of these things. They become easier to let go of.
Yeah, and it can be easy to get sort of on this hamster wheel of I'm so used to having enemies, and as you were saying, that I sort of define myself in opposition to. Swedenborg puts it finds rest in unrest, that you can sort of think that this is my life, is I'm winning against other people, and you don't even realize that there's a whole other way. I think of it like eating a bunch of junk food. I find the more junk food that I'm eating, the more I'm craving junk food. And so you just keep going from junk food to junk food. And it's very hard to stop and say, all right, I'll eat something green,
That's very true. That's very true. And a lot of times people's identities are wrapped up in their grievances. Mm-hmm. And you notice people want sometimes to have somebody to be against, the Super Bowl was on yesterday. Yep. And I didn't watch a lot of it, but I watched a little of it. I don't really follow football very much, but I found myself trying to think, well, who do I want to win? Even though I was barely aware who was playing. And, I noticed, if I want somebody to win, I guess the game becomes that much more exciting. And I guess that's true. But as long as you can let go of it afterward, and there are people who are into sports fandom who get very, very upset if their team loses, for example. They get resentful of another team that is like the big rival. They may be angry at their own team for not doing as well as they ought to. So, in a way, your identity starts to crystallize around this series of grievances. Now, sports fandom is a reasonably harmless way of doing this. Most people realize, sports are just sports. But if it gets into some kind of a grudge or grievance that has like a political angle, a religious angle, an ethnic angle, these can be like really, really hard to uproot because, for one thing, a lot of times these have been ingrained in you since your earliest childhood. Your identity is part of some group that has been wronged or hurt. And you might not know who you are if you let go of this kind of collective grievance. And I think there are whole nations and peoples that are really laboring under this. To get a whole nation or collective group of people to let go of all this is not really possible, at least not in current circumstances. But from our point of view, as an individual, you can let go and say, I don't really want to buy into this.
Yeah, you can do your little part. And that's a great segue into our next segment, because we're talking about, this seems like this is a valuable thing. oh, this resentment, whatever kind of anger, hostility I have seems valuable because I am defining myself. I'm getting motivation. Things are more exciting because of it. But what we're finding out here is that actually you might be better off ditching the whole thing. So let's look at our second topic. So before we get into part 2, opening the Skylight, I want to remind you guys that this is an interactive thing. We want you guys commenting, asking questions on wherever you're watching, Facebook, YouTube. Get them in there. In the second half of the show, we're going to try our best to respond, and we just want to hear your voices as well, so get those in. Now, we titled this segment Opening the Skylight, and I want to read a couple quotes from Swedenborg that show why we did that. The first one is from the Doctrine of Life 67. To the extent that we turn our backs on all kinds of killing because they are sins, we have love for our neighbor. All kinds of killing means all kinds of hostility, hatred, and vengefulness which yearn for murder. Killing lies hidden within such attitudes, like fire that smolders beneath the ashes. This is exactly what hellfire is. It is why we say that people are on fire with hatred and burning for vengeance. And let's take a look at the second quote. So this is from Divine Providence 207. And once harmful loves have been banished, the Lord comes in with impulses of love for our neighbor. He opens the skylights and then the windows in our walls and enables us to see that heaven is real, that there is a life after death, and that there is eternal happiness. By the spiritual light and the spiritual love that then flow in together, he enables us to recognize that through his divine providence, God is taking care of everything. So I think of sort of the juxtaposition from the imagery in the first quote and the second quote, the vengefulness and the burning, obsessive nature versus the second one where you're open to these sort of higher principles and a belief in a higher power. So it seems that there we have, this is sort of a before and after shot of what life can be like for us if we can let go of these kind of burning resentments.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And, then the question becomes, well, how do you let go?
Yes.
And, in my book, The Deal, it's a book about complete forgiveness, and it has its own step-by-step procedure for doing that, which, is quite simple and clear to follow. I'm not going to go into that here because it would just take too long. Mm-hmm. But, how do you let go of grievances? What's the technique? Well, it's in a way difficult, in a way not, because, of course, if you're holding a hammer in your hand and I tell you to drop the hammer, you don't have to ask me how. You just let it drop.
Right.
And our emotional lives are more like this than you think, or people often think. You can just walk away and say, I don't really need this anymore. It's easier if the offense that you're walking away from, the grievance you're walking away from is light or trivial, but the principle applies. In fact, one way of getting good at this is to just make a practice of letting go of little irritations that crop up during the day.
Yeah.
A fairly simple example is being cut off in traffic, or some motorist in the next lane is doing something you don't like, or is being rude or even dangerous. Some irritation is likely to come up, but you can make a conscious point of letting go, just not bothering it. Well, it's over. Maybe the person sped ahead of you. All right, well, he's gone. You don't have to worry about it anymore. And people aren't always aware of this. You can, have some guy cut you off, on the highway, and in some kind of weird way, it can ruin your day. You can get into the spiral of thinking, people are lousy, people are rotten, everybody's in it for themselves, and you can carry that mood throughout the day with you. But you can also say, well, I just let it go. It happened. It's over. I don't really need to bother about it anymore. And your mind is clear enough so that you can go ahead and, do what you have to do next. And, life will seem better if you practice doing that on little things and also with larger things.
And you need that practice on the little things because, like, if we're talking about sports, if you don't do your drills, when the game comes, you're not going to be ready. And I find it's a great point about the dropping the hammer. And I find that with the bigger stuff, it's like I make a decision that I'm going to drop that hammer and keep dropping it because I will like let go of something and then it wants back in. It's like, wait, here's a new angle on that. That guy that cut you off, what if he was thinking this when he cut you off and like trying to pull me back in. So it's almost like I'm issuing some decree that's like, no matter what, I'm going to keep dropping this hammer as it falls. And okay, so that's great advice. I really appreciate it. I love practical sort of stuff because it's these little sort of day-to-day things that kind of keep us in these unhappy states of mind. And we've been looking at the unhappy states of mind in these first two segments. Let's get to our third one, which is a little bit about, so we've got some happiness. How do we keep it going? All right, so yeah, how do you maintain? There's a positive and a negative side, and the way Swedenborg describes it, you got to take care of the negative side first. You got to be pushing these things out of the way so that the good things can come in. But then, how do you keep the good things flowing, and what are they? So let's take a look. We have a quote from Secrets of Heaven 464. The opinion of some is that a life of leisure and being waited on by others constitutes heaven. And the way that Swedenborg describes heaven, it's a state of mind as much as a place. So if we're talking about happiness, you could substitute heaven. To these I said that happiness never consists in seeking satisfaction directly from doing nothing. If it did, we would inevitably want to take others' happiness for our own. And if everyone did, no one would be happy. Such a life would not be active but idle, resulting in sluggishness. As anyone can see, life holds no joy unless it is active. Angelic life consists in usefulness and acts of neighborly kindness. And Richard, going back to your example of the person cutting you off in traffic, I find that if I can train my mind on something else, like, okay, well, now I'm doing this, or I'm thinking this, or I'm planning this, it becomes a lot easier for me to not dwell and sort of ruminate on what that person did than if I don't have anything to occupy me. Does that seem true to you?
Yeah, and the mind has positive things that it enjoys. It has creative interests. It has things that it likes finding out about. Everybody's a little different that way. We all have our hobbies and little things that we follow, but these things give us pleasure. And some of it is just a matter of training yourself to think about things that you find pleasurable rather than thinking about all the things that upset you. Just make a conscious decision to think about things that you enjoy thinking about. This is not really, living in some kind of denial of the world. No one's asking you to, cut off all connection with reality. But I think sometimes people think reality, is or has to be harder than it probably does. The whole, thing about reality is that, it's a hard world out there. It's a hard life. And, if you don't face that fact, you're just being unrealistic. I think part of the things in the Swedenborg quote that you just read was saying that, well, if you can let go of some of this hardness, some of these grievances and grudges, you can see, a much brighter and a much happier world right in front of you. It's not, as he points out, in some other world. It's this world seen through somewhat different eyes.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I really like the idea of practicing thinking about things that are positive. I mean, just recently I was, you can sort of go through life thinking it's like a book with a narration, and wherever the narration is, being your thoughts, that's where it's got to be. But you can swap the thoughts that you're thinking for other thoughts. And sometimes when I see this, and because I always sort of feel worried, if I stray from the narration, then I'm missing something. Okay, this guy cut me off. I've got to think about the thoughts that are coming in fast. Are these thoughts about how bad he is? Something's my fault. All these negative thoughts. But if I consciously say I'm going to draw my attention somewhere else, suddenly I discover that I can be thinking hard about something else and get these creative ideas. All this cool stuff can come in that wouldn't have been there if I'd stuck with the original narration. So I just think that's cool, and hopefully you guys at home can find something out of all we've said that you can use practically to move through day to day. All right, and we're going to hear from you right on the other side of this break. So get your questions in, and we'll respond the best we can. Stay tuned. Okay, all right, it's time. It's that time again. It always goes a lot faster than I think it will, but this is a cool segment, so I'm glad that we're here. Either way, it's where we want to hear what you guys think about the conversation. It can be questions, it could be some kind of pertinent comment. We just want to get it out and hear some other voices. So let's go to our first one right now. This is from Martin on Facebook. Grievances and resentments can be hard to recognize because, like you say, we identify with them. Any tips on how to get alerted as to when we're under the influence? Yeah, that's a really good question because it can be. You can be, I don't even realize sometimes when I'm ruminating on something negative. So, Richard, did you have any initial thoughts?
Yeah, the most obvious way to do it is ask yourself how you're feeling. A lot of times, you may be kind of upset or irritable, and there's some kind of background thought that's bothering you. Step number one is to say, what actually is bothering me? Is it something somebody said like a couple of hours ago that's kind of sticking in the back of my head? Being aware of it is really the first step. I had a friend years ago who had to teach her dog to stop barking, and she said, well, the first thing you do to teach a dog to stop barking is to teach it that it's barking.
Yeah.
If it suddenly becomes aware that it's actually doing this, it's much easier to teach it how to stop. And I think the human mind is like that too.
Yeah, absolutely. That I gotta remember to go home and teach my dog that he's barking, and because you don't always know that you're in it, and I think that there's something to getting some kind of contrast, that to be able to see the opposite of something. Sometimes if I have higher truths, stuff out of Swedenborg or somewhere else that I consider to kind of be universal kind of guiding lights, I'll sometimes check my current state of mind against those. If I think about this principle, love for the human race or God's providence is guiding things. How does that clash with my current state? Does it feel different? That can sometimes be sort of a tell to me. And then even things like, body posture. Just does it feel small and intense, or is it relaxed? So those are a few. I like yours a lot, Richard, and hopefully you guys in the chat room can offer some as well. All right, let's get to our next one. This is from Pamela on Facebook. You've talked about anger and irritation. How about sadness? Yeah, so that's a great point, because if you're not happy, that's not always because you're upset. It can be sadness as well. And I find, so the way Swedenborg describes kind of the negative things in the mind, he sort of divides those into what he calls evils and falsities. And for me personally, I find that if it's anger, there's some kind of evil that's leading. There's falsity in there too. Like if somebody's done something to me that bothers me, there's the evil that in the quotes from Swedenborg. Okay, so if hopefully there was no interruption of service there, we just had a giant icicle fall through the ceiling. No, the computer crashed. So don't even worry about it. We're back. So I was in the middle of saying that if it's sadness that we're in, to me it feels like there's often some kind of like false belief, like, oh, I'm not good enough because of this, or something like that. I mean, that's for like chronic, long-lasting sadness. There's all kinds of things like legit, I just lost somebody or something bad has happened, and that, to me, it almost feels like you just got to live through that. So those are a few of my scattered thoughts on it. Richard, did you have any thoughts on sadness and kind of the cures for that?
Well, my suggestion might be a little off left field, but a lot of feelings people have are not necessarily real feelings. That is to say, sometimes people feel like they ought to be feeling something when they're not. I, in some kind of way, ought to be feeling sad. Let's say I ought to be feeling sad about the world situation. Yeah, there are a lot of problems in the world, no denying it. But if you take it further, there's another thing, too. A lot of people have feelings of one sort or another as a way of seeming like good people to themselves. I should be sad about this situation because I'm a good person and a good person should feel sad about this situation. This doesn't always follow. It's much better to be exactly quite honest with yourself about how you actually do feel about something than to think, well, I should be angry, I should be sad, because then, in a way, it's a false emotion. There's times when you do feel genuine sadness and genuine anger, and sometimes you have to feel those feelings without indulging them, that is to say, acting them out, or prolonging them any longer than they're really going on. Okay, I felt sad about this, and you can kind of tell, sometimes you're just, well, I guess I'm still feeling sad, almost as a matter of habit.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're aware of some of those things, even things like sadness can be possible to let go of.
Yeah, it reminds me of the grieving process, and some people will feel like, oh, I should be feeling like this now because this has happened, but that all people who have studied it and had experience with it say, you grieve how you need to, and that we have feelings as we need to. Okay, so those are a few of our thoughts. Hopefully that's interesting. And if there's any of you out there who have other thoughts on it, feel free to write them down. Continue that conversation. Let's get to our next one. This is from Michelle on YouTube. My sister has never really been close to the rest of us, but when my father was dying last Christmas, she never made any contact with us or our dad. For that, I will never forgive her. I have let go of many things in the last few years, but I will never be able to let this go. So, first of all, thanks for sharing that. I mean, that's a really personal story, and this is different. This is different than somebody cut you off in traffic. So, that I can see that that's an intense personal thing, and I just really appreciate you being able to share that. And so, Richard, do you have thoughts on that kind of feeling, and when the thing is that raw?
Yeah, I mean, and those are much bigger than getting cut off in traffic. I guess one thing I would say is, I mean, are you hanging on to this feeling? I mean, the thing is over. Your sister didn't do that. You don't have to pretend that it was all right. But on the other hand, you don't have to beat yourself up internally about the fact that she didn't do this. Maybe it feels good to have this kind of righteous anger against her. And sometimes it does, and that's part of the whole situation. It would probably feel better if you could let go of it. And the other thing is, like to say, I will never let go of this. Well, that's a self-fulfilling prophecy. I will never forgive that. That's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Mm-hmm. You can make that decision. You're quite free to make that decision and hold on to it for the rest of your life. People do. But there's another way of looking at it, saying, well, that happened. I didn't think it was really a good thing that she did. But on the other hand, I'm just going to stop upsetting myself about it. Now, the other thing, too, is you can let all of this go, and you don't necessarily have to talk to your sister. You don't have to have some kind of huggy reconciliation. You could just let it go. And, well, you see your sister, you don't see her. It's kind of equal to you. You don't have to, create some kind of false or imagined intimacy, even with a sister, because this has taken place and because you forgive her. You don't have to condone it. But there is a way of just kind of letting it go and putting it behind you. And do you have to call your sister again? No, not necessarily. But you can stop upsetting yourself about it if you want to. It is to some extent a choice. And the choice not to forgive is to some extent a matter of will. And we have free will. You can choose to hang on to something or not. The only thing I would add is that you do have the chance You do have the option of letting it go as well, and it's just not a bad idea to remember that.
Yeah, and what I feel like is really pertinent about that, thanks, Richard, is it is hard to separate out forgiving and condoning and the actions you take. It can feel like, okay, I can't ever forgive a person because if I forgive them, that'll be saying it's okay what they did. But it's important to note those can be two different things. And if I forgive them, I'm going to have to invite them over and have this reconciliation. So that really this forgiveness is about you and how you're relating to it, and that the outward actions can be different based on what's appropriate. But I think that's just a really good point and something to keep in mind, that you could even act the exact same toward a person, but how you're feeling about the issue has changed. Mm-hmm. So thanks. And we're going to do one more question here. And this is from Mark on YouTube. What if you're sad and feel powerless to change the circumstances you're in? Thanks, Mark, for sharing that. And I've been there. I go there on a regular basis. I remember just recently being like, I don't know how to do this. I don't know what to do. And it's tough because if you feel like your resources are spent, it's hard to know where to get additional power from, and I would say that, life is long. I mean, I've found that there's been times when I felt completely stuck, and sometimes it seems like, by my own effort, I really rev myself up and apply techniques and that kind of thing, and that can seem to make progress. But other times it's just like the tide of the ocean, like, now things are better. So for me, the most important thing has been, keep some kind of hope, and to me that sort of runs trusting in something higher, and just thinking, okay, things can get better, even if they're not now, and I don't necessarily have to figure it out. So I'll even I remember keeping a journal when things were really bad, and I would look back at it and realize, actually earlier this week I was pretty happy, because it just seems like everything's gray forever. But when I actually started to document it. So those are a few of my thoughts. Richard, did you want to add something?
Yeah. You're certainly not powerless in terms of your own feelings, but that may be hard to grasp at times. Another thing that's worth looking at is there is some amount of self-forgiveness here. Mm. And a lot of the kind of anxiety and mental torture that people go through is the fact that they should be able to change it, they should be able to do something, but they can't, or they can't figure it out. And there may be times, and I think you were pointing this out, Curtis, where you just have to say, yeah, I feel sad in this situation. Mm-hmm. I feel powerless. Now, there are two types of powerlessness. One is, you're in jail and you can't get out of jail. I mean, literally. That's, in a way, it's being powerless. There's another kind of feeling of powerlessness, which is feeling powerless over your own feelings and your own thoughts. And that's a much more interesting thing to explain and to explore. To say that you can just snap yourself out of it by a few positive thoughts, that you chant through your mind may not be completely realistic. But you do have more control and you do have more power over feelings than you might think. This may, in fact, involve taking some kind of external action. It may involve getting some kind of professional help or therapy if this is like a really long-standing issue, but that can be done. And even sometimes just going and talking to someone, even taking a step like this, just bringing it up on a Facebook discussion, is a way of taking power of the situation. Yeah. So there's, I think, some hope, and I think there's some grain of a way out in just realizing those couple of things.
Yeah, that's a great point. And so, Mark, thanks very much for offering that to kind of let us know what's going on and let us have this conversation, because you don't know how many other people are feeling like you're feeling. So I appreciate you stepping up there. And everybody who commented, thank you very much. We're going to take a very quick break, and then we'll come back to wrap things up. All right, so this is the part of the show where we try to do a little kind of experiential exercise, as we call it correspondences, which that comes out of Swedenborg's writings, where he talks about external things, the things that we can see, being sort of a symbol or an image of deeper spiritual internal things. And today we want to look at water, and he talks a lot about water as being a symbol for the truth, and that the truth acts in the soul like water acts in the world, that it can be nourishing. And a lot of the stuff we were talking about with this resentment, those kind of, by learning what's really true about situations, about ourselves, it can lift a lot of these things. So it's like water washing away the confusion. So those are a few of the thoughts from Swedenborg on water. So Richard, I know that you've done a lot of studying of different spiritual, esoteric traditions. What does water symbolize across those?
Most commonly, it signifies the psyche, the whole ocean of thoughts and feelings that we live in. And this is not a private ocean, so to speak. It's an enormous ocean, and our thoughts and emotions, in a very literal way, blend into other people's. Now, you'll notice sometimes in the Gospels, you'll hear some reference to living water. That's a technical term. In the Jewish ritual, you had to have purification with living water, which means literally running water, or water that's connected to a large body of water. A swimming pool would not be living water. A stream would be. And I think one reason for that is that this living water symbolizes a connection of one's own psyche, one's own soul, if you like, with this larger kind of ocean of psyche that everybody lives in. So I think that's one major theme that water has in a lot of the world's traditions.
Awesome. So you at home, with that in your mind, we're going to take a look at a few images of water and just concentrate and see what comes to you. We could talk about the facets of water and what that might symbolize forever. You just see it in those different forms there, and there's so much in there, but we'll just leave it at where we had it now. Thank you everybody for watching. This was a really fun show. If you guys want to support the show, feel free to make a small donation to the Swedenborg Foundation. Just open up the description of the video, and it's tax deductible and everything. There's a link in there. Richard Smoley, thanks so much for coming on the program. If you guys want to get a hold of any of Richard's books, including The Deal, the one we talked about today, the link to his website is in the description of the video as well. Richard, thanks so much for being on the program.
Thanks. It's been a pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
All right. Excellent. Everyone else, we'll see you next Monday.